Well, hello and welcome to Critical Weight Theory and my little show within a show that I call Reply To, which is basically me replying to YouTube comments on my podcast episodes. So, the right wingers have recently been commenting on one of my videos, and that episode was titled The SPLC Was Dismantling Hate and MAGA is Inverting Reality, as usual. And man, did they not like that episode. They gave it a bunch of thumbs downs, and they're trying to rip the episode to pieces. They're claiming that they've fully debunked all of my talking points, and they're like, why don't you debate us and all that kind of stuff. Well, for one thing, this isn't really a debate bro uh podcast. I'm not really that interested in that because, well, debate is actually more about tactics than about whether or not you're factually correct or ethically correct or anything like that. Because you can win a debate without actually being at all correct. And that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of debates. But these reply to episodes are sort of my way of approximating a debate without needing to actually talk to some of these morons out there. I don't need to directly interact with them. And I did actually respond to them in the comments section of the video. And I don't think they liked that either. They actually did not want a debate because they did not further respond. So here is my video where I'm going to respond to them in this delightful little episode. So you've got some quotes here from these people, like, check this one out. The extremist groups currently causing problems in the US right now is Antifa. So, wow, just straight out of the Trump talking points playbook, I guess. But I'm going to start off really here with the defense of Deutsche Bank that one of these people made. And this user is called Keith Kiramoto 5498. And they rather oddly were hell bent on defending Deutsche Bank, which is actually a bank that helped fund Auschwitz. Yes, that's right. They're a Nazi affiliated bank historically. And this person was very quick to go to their defense, but of course, not so quick to defend, the left in general. So a Nazi-linked bank, they're good, but if you're at all on the left, well, then you're bad, I guess. So here's one of the parts of their response. So they said, "Ah, yes, a company from Germany connected to Nazis during World War II makes them a Nazi now. So every German who interacts with Deutsche Bank is a Nazi or white supremacist? Deutsche Bank doing business instead of grandstanding or morally finger wagging is reasonable. What about that bank that Trump supposedly scammed as one and was unsuccessfully sued for? Didn't they say they would still do business with him? I stopped at 5 minutes here." So basically, that's a person saying they couldn't go on with my video because I was too quick to pick on Trump, which is, something they just cannot stand. And one of these people was also like, "I can't believe you called somebody a moron, in the comments section. How could you call one of the people who made a comment a moron?" So, of course, the message there is only Donald Trump is allowed to call people moron or call them stupid or something like that. Only if you're MAGA or right wing do you have a right to call anybody a name. If you're on the left, you're not allowed to say mean things about other people. That's the only thing that the right wing can do. That they can say mean things about other people, and they don't have to prove anything factually or logically or anything like that. Just be a bully, and they're the only ones who have a right to be a bully. And if you try to bully the bullies back, well, then you're the only bully that matters. So, before getting to other points of this person's really lengthy comment, I had to react to this baffling defense of Deutsche Bank. I greatly questioned the wisdom and morality of someone springing to defend a Nazi affiliated bank. So right here is a solid it's a solid piece of evidence that these MAGAs are not the anti-establishment rebels that they so often claim to be. Because rigorously defending a bank, especially one with historically Nazi ties, proven direct Nazi ties, so that is the literal opposite of being anti establishment. And look at how this clown normalizes Deutsche Bank's track record. Being so quick to defend them while bashing the Southern Poverty Law Center is insane. Deutsche Bank actively participated, in the Aryanization of Jewish businesses, traded gold stolen from Holocaust victims, and financed the construction of the Auschwitz camp. I'm not really going to be that quick to defend Deutsche Bank, just knowing that. And oddly enough, the issue here isn't just what Deutsche Bank did in the 1940s, it's also their continuous modern track record of financing ethically compromised institutions when every other reputable financial pillar actually refuses to do so. So, right now, Deutsche Bank is funding an ICE concentration camp, or at least they're funding one of them. They might be involved in setting up others, I'm not sure. There's one of them that I'm aware of. And I talked about it in one of my previous videos. And then you have to wonder why they are so tightly aligned with Donald Trump in the first place, talking about Deutsche Bank. So keep in mind, and you can look into this yourself, American banks had pretty much completely cut ties with Donald Trump after a string of high profile bankruptcies and defaults in the 1990s, viewing him as toxic. But Deutsche Bank, again a historically Nazi linked bank, stepped in as his primary financial lifeline, underwriting billions in loans despite internal red flags. Separately, major global financial institutions have increasingly pulled away from underwriting private for profit ICE detention centers due to severe systemic human rights abuses. However, Deutsche Bank chose to step into that vacuum. It is not reasonable business, it is a deliberate corporate pattern of capitalizing on human suffering and financial risk that other institutions might, one would hope, reject on some ethical, regulatory, reputational, or even just financial grounds. Meanwhile, yes, I'm going to say it, I'm going to go there. Deutsche Bank has Jeffrey Epstein ties. Would you believe that? So it's yet another thing associated with Trump that is in some way associated with Jeffrey Epstein. So Deutsche Bank faced heavy regulatory penalties for taking on disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein as a client back in 2013, opening over 40 accounts for him and failing to monitor suspicious transactions. So in 2023, the bank paid $75 million dollars in a class action settlement to his victims and was fined on $150 million dollars by New York regulators. In fact, it's almost like they're not just a Nazi bank necessarily, they're also involved in these wealthy sexual predator schemes. And there were also some Russian money laundering probes. So the fun doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with being a Nazi bank. It doesn't stop with being an Epstein linked bank. So the bank has been embroiled in multiple recurring investigations regarding money laundering. German authorities raided Deutsche Bank's headquarters in Frankfurt in connection to a major money laundering probe examining whether the bank failed to file suspicious activity reports regarding foreign companies linked to sanctioned Russian oligarchs. So, the fun ball keeps on rolling here. And what about their regulatory record? Well, regulatory watchdogs report that Deutsche Bank has paid billions of dollars in fines and penalties over the past 2 decades regarding a multitude of violations, including violations of U.S. economic sanctions and involvement in massive European money laundering schemes, such as the mirror trading scandals. So, if you're non MAGA, maybe you'll look into that stuff. I don't think there's much I can do for the MAGA people who don't understand how Google works, so they will not look into this stuff. It's like a serious issue, and I hope they seek help and sort of better understand the issues, which are not just, you know, making Trump look good or making Trump look bad. That's not all that this is about. There are actual facts involved in this, that just happened to make Trump look bad. So it kind of seems like Deutsche Bank is a bad bank and worth criticizing. So, what about the corporate death penalty? Is anyone interested in issuing that to Deutsche Bank? Because that's something they should have faced just based on the Nazi ties alone. So, this YouTube comment also went into do an Antifa and Graham Plattner deflection. So Keith Kiramoto 5498, he also said, or I don't know, they also said, I don't know the actual gender of the person. What I will say is that I think it's not an actual bot. I think this is a real human being. So I guess credit where it's due. This does seem like an actual person. But anyway, Keith Kiramoto 5498 went on to say, where is the Trump admin cozying up to extremism? The extremist groups currently causing problems in the US right now is Antifa. As you said prior, the SPLC destroyed the KKK and neo Nazis in the past. Well, I have to correct that because they didn't fully destroy them, and that's not a claim that I actually made. The point was that they messed with certain chapters of these organizations or certain expressions and networks of them. They weren't totally destroyed because guess what? You can't actually totally destroy an idea. At least in most cases, you can't. So, anyway, Keith Kiramoto 5498 continues. You are blinded by absolute partisanship for not calling out the Democrats for their willingness to hide their corruption and not call them out for them supporting actual terrorists or neo Nazis. One who has had a Nazi tattoo on his chest for 20 plus years. So that's a reference to Graham Plattner, who has become somebody that the right wing is quite concerned about. And I'll get more into that in a little bit here. I'm not going to go into that rigorous of a defense of Graham Plattner because he's a grown man; he can defend himself. Um, but anyway, the point about Antifa being the biggest threat right now, well, this directly contradicts official assessments from the U.S. intelligence community. The FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence repeatedly stated that white supremacist extremism and domestic violent extremism represent the most persistent and lethal threat to the homeland. Now, I know that MAGA is trying to complicate that narrative by claiming that the SPLC is actually like somehow a Nazi organization. But the point is, this was the previous FBI and the previous Department of Homeland Security and Director of National Intelligence saying that white supremacism is the type of extremism that's causing the most problems here. While the historic infrastructure of the 20th century KKK was significantly impacted by civil rights lawsuits, far right violent extremism has actually migrated online, remaining responsible for the vast majority of lethal domestic terror incidents in recent American history, including the Buffalo supermarket shooting and the January 6th Capitol attack. The FBI has consistently clarified that Antifa is actually an unorganized ideological movement and it barely exists functionally as any sort of organization. It's not a centralized bureaucratic organization with a lethal track record. So, as for the specific swipe at Maine Democrat Graham Plattner, calling him an actual neo Nazi is quite absurd. Yes, it's true that Plattner came under heavy scrutiny for a skull and crossbones chest tattoo resembling a Nazi symbol, which he stated was a young drunken mistake from his military days that he has since completely covered up. But labeling him a Nazi fundamentally ignores his actual ideology and record. He is a progressive populist who has publicly campaigned against ICE violence, demanded an end to mass deportations, and has openly voiced support for things like transgender rights. So, true neo Nazis do not advocate for immigrant human rights or LGBT plus equality. And I got to tell you, if you think that a genuine Nazi is going to be routinely advocating for immigrants and the rights of LGBT people, well, you do not understand what the Nazi ideology is. You don't understand what the left is. You probably don't understand what conservatism is, or what the Republican Party actually is. And that's one of the ways that Donald Trump and MAGA has partially wrecked the world, because he's created this online lack of community that masquerades as a community that really doesn't understand what any of these political ideas mean. It doesn't understand, the actual history of these movements, or the fact that the KKK and neo Nazis are actually not pro immigration, and they're not pro gay marriage and gay rights and stuff like that. At least not historically. Now, again, the MAGA movement is really adding confusion to people's understanding of history and what these ideological movements are. But nevertheless, if you believe that Graham Plattner is a Nazi by being pro immigrant and pro gay rights, well, I don't know what to tell you. So let's look at another part of this response, which is getting into the myth of the SPLC keeping hate groups on life support. So Keith Kiramoto 5498, he said that the SPLC funded white supremacist groups, not invented them. They did it to keep people donating to them. The SPLC kept the groups on life support. They did not just fund informants. So, this is getting into the secret informant program lie that is being pushed by the Trump administration. The claim that the SPLC used donations to fund extremism stems from Trump's Justice Department targeting the center's past use of paid informants. In reality, the SPLC used a confidential informant program for over a decade to infiltrate groups like the KKK and neo Nazis. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche claimed the SPLC acted covertly and withheld information gathered by its informants from law enforcement. But this claim was apparently proven materially false in court filings. The SPLC's attorneys exposed that federal authorities were aware of the program and that the SPLC had shared specific intelligence and findings with the FBI and local law enforcement agencies, presumably to prevent violence. So, look, I know you could have critiques of the SPLC, you could critique the FBI, you could critique all of those things, but the point is the SPLC, by all evidence, was actually acting within the confines of the law. And really, the idea that you can trust the Trump administration, take their word on anything, I think that's ridiculous by this point, and I'll get into that a little bit. But I just want to also say that former federal prosecutors, they'll tell you that undercover programs are standard investigative tactics. SPLC intelligence successfully prevented violent attacks, have led to arrests, and have saved lives. Furthermore, the SPLC sits on an endowment of over $750 million. So structurally, they do not rely on creating clickbait crises or keeping hate groups on life support just to keep their doors open. You know, the idea that they're intentionally creating these groups just to make money, I think that's, well, it's potentially slanderous at the very least, but it's also something that you cannot demonstrate. So, just in general, we should not trust anything the Trump administration says. Trump routinely lies about things like the 2020 election. He constantly lies about damn near everything else, too. So, keep in mind, Pam Bondi, who is, of course, a prominent Trump administration official, she bizarrely claimed that the DOJ drug seizures that they did saved 258 million lives. And they are pursuing all sorts of bizarre legal crackdowns for the flimsiest of reasons. So the Trump administration's Department of Justice not that long ago indicted former FBI Director James Comey over an Instagram photo of seashells arranged to spell out 8647 on a North Carolina beach. So if you think they care one iota about facts and truth and justice and what is legally actionable or not, you're basically out of your goddamn mind. They don't care about what is worth pursuing as a legal case. They just do not care about that. It's a cult. It is a cult that follows the orders of Donald Trump, just like the Manson family would follow the orders of Charles Manson. So, a seashell photo is a crime now? I mean, are you seriously going to take these people as if they're full of valid ideas and they care about what actual justice is being done in the world and all that? These are some of the most embarrassing people in all of human history, and they lie and lie and lie. So they're also going after the specific some specific individuals who were involved in the SPLC. So Keith Kiramoto 5498 goes after Heidi Byrich, I believe her name might be pronounced. Anyway, Keith says Byrich, the former director of the Southern Poverty Law Center's intelligence project, dated a white supremacist and gave him money for his organization to keep it going. The SPLC created shell corporations to hide what they were funding slash doing. So remember that these charges came from a highly politicized Trump administration that does not necessarily care at all about what is true and what is not. So the SPLC has maintained that these allegations are politically motivated and is fighting them in court, while the government has targeted the SPLC over financial reporting regarding informant funds. It is completely dishonest to pretend a top researcher was proven to be actively trying to bankroll neo Nazis out of some ideological sympathy. And the allegation is, again, coming from the Trump administration, which is a proven pack of known vicious liars. So there's another weird claim that Keith Kiramoto 5498 made, and it involves hate crimes against Asians. So this person said the hate crimes committed against Asians were black people, but as soon as that was revealed, the whole thing was dropped. So let's get into that. This is a common racially divisive talking point meant to minimize white supremacy, which is why it's promoted by MAGA. According to extensive demographic data compiled by academic institutions like the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, anti Asian hate crimes escalated sharply across major US cities during the pandemic. And why might that be? Well, could it be because Donald Trump was calling it things like the China virus or the China plague? Gee, I wonder. I wonder if that might have had the smallest little bit to do with it. So, this claim that black people were responsible for all of those crimes, or even most of them, is a distortion of the facts. While some high profile viral videos showed black individuals attacking Asian Americans, extensive data analysis and hate crime reports show that the majority of perpetrators of anti Asian hate crimes have historically been identified as white. So, for instance, the University of Michigan's Virulent Hate Project found that in 2020, about 75% of physical attacks and nearly 90% of all reported harassment incidents involved white perpetrators. Yet this YouTuber is trying to make it seem like, oh, it's just black people doing this. And security camera footage in urban areas went viral on social media, which has contributed to a false narrative that, of course, MAGA latches onto. But the SPLC and other human and civil rights organizations never dropped the issue. That's another lie that this person snuck in there, that they just dropped the issue. Nobody's talking about it anymore. But the SPLC and others, left leaning organizations as well, have consistently tracked how online extremist spaces, white nationalists, and mainstream political figures use the pandemic to stoke anti-Asian animus. So the point is, this YouTube commentator or commenter, they thought they really had me, in a stranglehold, like logically couldn't get out of it and all that kind of stuff. But they were just saying stuff that made them look like, guess what? I'm going to be a bully again. They looked like morons, you know? And all the little thumbs downs that you can do on YouTube, it's not gonna mean you're correct just because you can click the dislike button. I know you can say little critiques on the YouTube video. You can you can share the video, you can like somebody else's attack on the episode, you can do all that stuff, but it actually doesn't mean you are correct. Imagine that. You can still be false while hitting the downvote button. I know it's crazy. But anyway, that's about all I've got to say about this. These people who are, making these comments and clicking the downvote button, they're probably not even going to watch this episode, even if I share it to their comments areas. They're probably still not going to listen to it. But here it is anyway, just on the off chance that they are interested in this. And it would be interesting if there could be some kind of freakish continuation of dialogue with these people. But frankly, I'm not particularly interested in that. But I just wanted to make another one of these reply to episodes for those people who lament how this is not a debate bro podcast. So this is like my approximation of that while still not having to directly engage with these freaks.